I was born the year that Richard Nixon resigned from office.
It's been like 25 years since 18-year-olds have been allowed to vote.
Plus, it was people of that age were being called on to fight in the war.
I don't know anything about it.
Do I vote?
In a lot of countries, people kill and die for the simple right.
Old enough to fight, old enough to vote. The 26th Amendment.
Understand that we are not a silent majority, but a very vocal and active majority dedicated to ending American oppression both abroad and here at home.
The battle cry rang out long before blood spilled in Vietnam. Old enough to fight, old enough to vote.
Fighting soldiers from the sky.
But not until this war did America's young make clear they would not be sacrificed silently.
Hell no, we won't go!
Some young people find a voice through protests, the likes of which this nation has never seen.
There's something happening here. What it is ain't exactly clear.
Others choose a less radical route and campaign for a presidential candidate who opposes the war in Southeast Asia.
Well, how are you? Say hello to Senator McCarthy this morning.
What is happening in New Hampshire may be important in tomorrow's primary and beyond. That is the big, energetic, exuberant outpouring of young, college-age men and women coming in to work through the existing system.
And so it's just crucial that you pay very close attention to the appearance you are presenting.
Appearances are not enough. It is Hubert Humphrey who accepts the Democrats' nomination at the Chicago Convention in 1968. Outside, chaos as war protesters clash with police. More and more often, dialogue is replaced by theatrics, nightsticks, even gunfire. In 1970, National Guardsmen and police fire on demonstrators on 2 campuses, and all 6 students died. The shootings escalate tensions on Rhode Island campuses. Here, too, the young rail against a system that would have them kill and die with no say. Devastation without representation.
It's 1, 2, 3, what are we fighting for? Don't ask me, I don't give a damn. Next stop is Vietnam. And it's 5, 6, 7, open up the pearly gates. Well, there ain't no time to wonder why. Whoopee, we're all gonna die.
Peaceful demonstrations, petitions, and speeches have failed. Brown University's long silence can only be considered our approval. Now, our only weapon against the war makers is by disrupting one of their tools, the university. With the future of this nation and the world at stake, Brown as an institution can no longer say it is neutral. While our intent is nonviolent, we must shut down URI.
Millions of people from all sectors of the society are mobilizing and mobilizing to end the war now.
All indications are that the independent man up there will be looking down tonight on the largest crowd that he has ever seen. This evening's activities climax a week of protest activity by the children of Aquarius, and today was no different.
Listen to us, Mr. Nixon. We've made a hope of a new tomorrow. Fill my cup again.
Away from the front lines and the headlines, the young map another strategy, winning the vote.
You're old enough to kill, but not for voting. You don't believe in war, but what's that gun you're toting?
Getting the vote at age 18 by itself certainly wasn't going to end the Vietnam War, but at the very least it was a way that students at that time felt that at least they could express how they felt on it, whereas, you know, at the time we had to be 21 to vote. You actually had no say whatsoever.
The plan comes under fire, but powerful allies managed to make it the law.
It seemed to me to be absolutely imperative, if they were going to fight for the country and die for the country, that they ought to at least be able to cast a vote that would influence the decisions.
The constitutionality of the new law is argued before the nation's highest court, whose decision creates problems.
As a result of the Supreme Court, there were different standards for federal election and state elections.
President Richard Nixon foresees costly confusion for each state. The crisis is averted by a constitutional amendment ratified in record time. Rhode Island is the 30th of 42 states to approve it.
Well, there was near unanimous agreement within the Democratic ranks. I had really thought about it when I went into the military at the age of 17. I thought then that if you're able to do this, you ought to have the right to vote.
My concerns were that you might have in some places where there was large college universities that suddenly hundreds or even more students might register in that particular community, and they're not from the community, they're in from out of state and so forth, and they might vote on various issues that would be detrimental to the town.
11 million new voters as a result of this amendment.
60,000 of the new voters are Rhode Islanders, many of them clustered in college towns. While most lawmakers show faith in the students, some of their neighbors are uneasy.
Everybody had this image of college students as protesting anything and everything, conducting wild demonstrations, burning down buildings, taking over the president's office and throwing the president of the college down the staircase, prancing around naked around the campus and having free sex, being drunk, and smoking pot and taking drugs. I never saw any of that stuff at URI.
Then you're not promoting a student takeover of the political life in South Kingstown?
Certainly not. I think there's little to be taken over specifically for the interests of students. I don't think that we have that great an interest here.
The old saying that young people should be seen and not heard has lost a lot of the impact that it used to have.
The enactment of the 18-year-old vote has broadened our electoral base.
You know, the law of unintended consequences kicks in many times, and so they thought that young people would overwhelmingly register Democrat. I don't think that's been proven the case.
Not only are 18 to 21-year-olds voting, they're running for office, too. Among the youngest elected public officials in the country is a teenager from Pawtucket.
I think that as an 18-year-old and a student, I can add a new dimension to the school committee. My views as a student will be heard, and also as a woman, because people may say your age is against you, your sex is against you in an election. I don't think that is true.
I think, you know, upon reflection, that it was pretty on target. My being a woman probably was an advantage, whereas I think being 18 might have been a source of some concern to voters. It was a novelty. We were a little bit on the cusp. A lot of the activism was on college campuses, and we were still in high school the year that 18-year-olds were allowed to vote. So it was a big deal to us, not just because of the local race, but also for people that were concerned about the Vietnam War and what kind of candidate they wanted to support for president, because that election was going to be coming up in 1972.
It is Richard Nixon who is re-elected president when young voters cast their first ballots in a federal election.
I've been working 18, 20 hours a day, mostly on Vietnam, trying to bring these men home.
A year later, in 1973, the U.S. withdraws from Vietnam, and troops finally begin the long journey home. The war teaches American youths that a unified voice can be powerful enough to change the United States Constitution.
1, 2, 3, 4.
25 years have passed since 18-year-olds won the vote. Is it a legacy lost on today's young?
It's hard to compare it now with the 60s and the 70s. The circumstances are different.
We'll be right back with more of Old Enough to Fight, Old Enough to Vote.
21 and I don't vote.
I'm planning to vote.
Yes, I do vote. I don't vote.
I plan on voting.
It is the birthright of Generation X. For them, old enough to fight does mean old enough to vote. Yet fewer of them cast ballots than does any other segment of the population.
Like, I just wait a little longer. I'm not ready yet.
I think that it's important that we have a decision on what happens later on in life. You know what I mean?
There hasn't been an election that I felt like I could really make much of a difference in.
I'm very much anti-government. All politics is lies. I don't really understand what's going on. Politicians are trickers and fools. I really don't care what's going on.
There's a big feeling nowadays that you can't really do that much about it, and that you're better off concentrating on getting your own life in order.
There are a lot of issues I think that kids my age should really speak up about, and I think there's a sort of apathy.
Apathy, but I think even more importantly, there's a cynicism, which I think is most disconcerting among people who are between the ages of 18 and 21, that we should be the least cynical people. That's the kind of culture that we've been socialized into.
But there also is a great deal of commitment on a lot of people's parts to making this world a better place.
The way I see it is I have to make a change.
Get on with it. If you want to change the world, shut your mouth, start this minute.
Many of today's 18 to 21-year-olds say the best way to change things is to ignore the political horse race. They focus on issues that directly affect them, like education, abortion rights, racism.
The hunger that we feel represents hunger for an idea, for equality on this campus.
Right here, right now.
But campus protests these days rarely capture the public's attention or the media's. In fact, they're not always well attended by students.
Everyone has their own things that they feel very strongly about and that they're willing to protest about and stand up for their own beliefs. But there isn't, right now, as I see it, one thing that everyone internalizes is impacting them immediately and that there's something that they should stand up for.
The thing that makes our generation most distinct is that we're more issue-oriented. Care about abortion rights, widening gap between poor and rich.
Just keeping the economy at a healthy level.
Social services, a lot of issues about like young people.
Maintaining my own welfare in the future.
Issues of affirmative action.
Proposed education cuts.
I look around here on this campus and people get involved in community service in terms of real local action. And maybe that's where we're going to make the largest change.
Oh, does anybody know how many lives we
World events occasionally capture the attention of the young, but nothing unites them the way that the Vietnam War did. American troops fight a controversial war in the Persian Gulf. The U.S. pulls out of Somalia before fulfilling a mission to feed the starving. Young Americans march into Bosnia under foreign command. Their peers at home have little to say about any of it.
Sometimes people just don't care. Sometimes you don't have the time to care.
There's no real call for solidarity. There's nothing going on.
It's pretty much, uninteresting for the young folks.
We don't feel like we can make a difference.
In 1972, hopes ran higher among the young. Nearly half of them took advantage of their brand new right to vote. However, that number dropped with each presidential campaign that followed. Young voters broke the pattern in 1992 when 38% of America's young picked a president.
A lot of young people were behind that and getting registered to get Bush out of office. So I was actually really into that election.
The issues that Clinton and Bush covered in 92 were hit more nerves with 18 to 22-year-olds, people who were starting out.
Clinton associated himself with our generation by playing his clarinet or saxophone or whatever. He was saying, yes, I am president, yes, I am, 40 plus, but I still have your concerns in my mind.
I think that some credit ought to go to, strangely enough, to MTV and the whole Rock the Vote movement.
That's probably part of the reason why I'm going to vote too.
Not too long ago, less than 30 years in fact, some very brave Americans were fighting, even dying, for their and your right to vote.
If Decision 92 reminded kids that the right to vote was hard-fought, The elections of 1996 promised to make registration quick, slick, and easy.
So this is the Rockabouts website.
HIP Hype and voter registration drive helped raise the number of Rhode Island youths registered to vote. Whether they make it to the polls is another matter.
It's amazing how many people say they're going to vote and then at the last second are doing something else. And I think that's especially true among students when they don't have specific attachments to where they live.
They don't vote because you have to get out of bed in the morning and do stuff to vote. You gotta go sign up.
Voting is a very small part of what you can do politically. Sometimes I think, my vote's gonna make a difference if I register, and then sometimes I think, well, it doesn't really care because politicians don't give a damn about my generation anyway.
Politicians and parents who won the vote 25 years ago are often the targets of youthful criticism. At the same time, Generation X mimics the Woodstock generation, its dress, music, even the hairstyles. That may be where the resemblance ends, or maybe not.
All them people who protested against the system or they grew up and got into the system.
Does anybody out there even care?
Please stay with us for more of Old Enough to Fight, Old Enough to Vote.
How many deaths will it take till he knows?
Nobody who's 18 years old now can even imagine what it's like not being able to plan your life at all. Because no matter what happened, at some point you had to worry about being drafted into the military. You couldn't plan on a job, you couldn't plan on school. You always had that hanging over your head.
But you tell me
What one generation will never forget, another is not old enough to remember.
you don't believe we're on the eve of destruction.
I know there was a lot of protest. They shut one of the campuses down. Everything, it's pretty sketchy. My history's pretty lousy.
But some of today's young began hearing tales of the Vietnam War era soon after they outgrew bedtime stories. Mom and Dad had lived this history.
I grew up in a family full of people who were involved in that.
I do hear a lot of stories through my mom and my aunt about activism, and it's interesting. My mom says how it was terrible.
I'm proud of what they did.
My aunt was like, oh, it was great.
Actually, both my parents are at Berkeley, very politically active.
My mother didn't go to her graduation in 1970 to protest the war.
But it really wasn't such a great time.
But we got to get ourselves back to the garden.
Relatives, history teachers, and Hollywood may paint a vivid picture of the 1970s. Yet few young adults recognize it as the decade the 26th Amendment allowed them the right to vote.
Wasn't it a long time ago?
I don't know anything about it.
Probably turn of the century or something. I don't see growing up, I don't remember us winning it.
I think maybe it was sometime in the 50s, although that could be totally wrong. Probably during one of the war, probably.
What prompted it mostly was the Vietnam War.
1972?
Yep, I believe so.
26th Amendment? Is that right?
Some who waged the battle for the ballot are unfazed that today's young show little interest in the victory.
If they're at that point where they're not working yet and they don't have a family yet, then they're absolutely right. It doesn't make any difference in their life. So why should they vote?
It's tough to think long. It's tough to think about what will impact you in 5, 10, 20, 30, 40 years. And frankly, you can't be sure.
What I don't think we have to deal with, that young people have to deal with today, are a lot of external pressures.
Did you think about your bills, your ex, your deadlines, or when you think you're gonna die? Or did you long for the next distraction? Can I help you with anything?
Today, there may be little room for political involvement in a schedule packed with school, work, and play. But if members of Generation X call that apathy, and they often do, they might get an argument from yesterday's young.
I sometimes wonder if it's apathy or if they lack the time to give it.
Nobody really talks about it oh my God, I have to go get, registered to vote.
I find that young people today are stressed out, stretched out.
They're usually like, let's go to a party or something.
I haven't seen any big difference between, people say in their 20s, 30s, 40s, or 50s.
I don't think they really care. They're just bopping around and having fun.
Nobody knows who I am, so therefore my vote really doesn't count. Bob Dole, President Clinton, it really doesn't matter.
I hate my generation.
Cynicism has long been part of the Young's reputation. But right now, that's something they share with many Americans. You can hear it in a call for political reform that spans the generations.
Cynicism in many ways comes from the feeling that things don't change in politics.
The kind of campaigns that are run today that are very negative, even at the local level, probably scare people away.
We really do need to do something to reform the whole electoral system.
There is no moral leadership out there anymore.
I'll take it, all right.
The generations sometimes share another perception, that politicians see young voters as a waste of time.
I don't think they really address anything that is really that interesting to us. I think mostly for like older people.
I think when you look at the percentage of young people who register and then vote, as opposed to the number of people, say, 50s and 60s and above, who register and vote, it's very clear that anyone who doesn't respond positively to the AARP and so forth absolutely has no future in public office.
Are they ignoring me? Absolutely, because people my age, we don't really have a lot going for us. We don't have like much control. We don't have a lot of cash. Why should we be responded to?
If young Americans envision a different political landscape, its outline is still faint.
Kids, I don't think they really think about the future, really, until it's there, and sometimes too late,
How is life going to be when I'm middle-aged?
Things are not looking good.
What they need to do is get somebody like me in office so I can take care of business.
It has been a quarter of a century since 18-year-olds won the right to vote for leaders whose policies could change their lives.
We thought that we could make a difference, and I think in some ways we did, in some ways we didn't. Not sure people today feel they can make a difference, and that's the thing that's very troubling.
Back then, the 26th Amendment gave the young an opportunity to participate in a national debate with life or death consequences.
It's very difficult to appreciate today what it was like to see literally hundreds and thousands and millions of kids demonstrating on college campuses in Washington. It had a very dramatic effect.
Today, when a young American votes, the issues may seem less compelling, but they are just as certain to shape the future.
Right,